public officials and citizens since 2020 also have developed new initiatives to foster meaningful change and advancement for equity and inclusion in this Bay City. The Santa Monica social justice events of 2020 were held at a place near where African Americans were able to build a sustained community in a city that was founded in the 1880s. These residents established themselves a few blocks from the Pacific shoreline in the environs of the Bay Street beach. This is I appreciate it. Okay. These residents established themselves a few blocks from the Pacific shoreline in the environs of the Bay Street Beach. This is the southern area of the Civic Center today, for those of you who know Santa Monica a little bit, and it's near Phillips Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, the city's first African-American owned spiritual and institutional space. And this was also the denomination's first church west of Texas. A short way south, a Venice enclave, some of you may know Venice, was also beginning to form during this early 20th century period, and it was considered part of the Santa Monica African American community. And this Venice community is this Black Venice community is what my current research project is about, and I just have finished the kind of second phase of it because I did some of the research when I did the book, but I just finished up, as Jose mentioned, a Getty Conservation Institute fellowship, so I was doing research on the historical community for that time period for the last 6 months. It's notable that an African American community in Los Angeles' Venice district and the city of Santa Monica have managed to survive waves of discrimination and gentrification for more than a century right by the beach. In the years surrounding Phillips Chapel's establishment in 1908 at 4th and Bay Streets, the oceanfront area down the hill around Pico, south a few blocks to Bicknell Avenue, emerged as a gathering place where African Americans from all over Los Angeles County and beyond came to enjoy the beach's pleasures. While the boundaries shifted through time, it was a popular beach destination for African Americans from the 1900s to the 1960s. Many beachgoers once referred to this area as the Bay Street Beach. White people, referring to the darker skin color of the beachgoers, also called this place by derogatory names. One of these names was the Inkwell. Some Black people repurposed this name as a badge of pride. Others refused to call the place by this name, and even today, many continue to prefer the name not be used for this place. Accessible by streetcar near a blossoming African-American enclave centered around Phillips Chapel and a few Black-owned businesses, this beach gathering place with La Bonita, which was a bathhouse, and a few other was a bathhouse and guest house, and a few other guest house, eating places, tennis courts, volleyball nets, and other recreational opportunities have this place become a place of refuge and community formation. And I would have a slide up that you can see Abonita's ad, which is very cool, from 1914. In 1922, a group of African American investors led by a prominent attorney prominent attorney Charles S. Darden, who was also a resort developer at Lake Elsinore, which I talk about in my book, and Norman O. Houston, who would go on to become a founder of Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company, which was for many years one of the largest African American owned businesses, certainly in the West and the nation. And he would go on to found some other businesses. They sought to develop a first-class resort along the oceanfront at Pico Boulevard. The plan was met with protests from white residents and businessmen. Santa Monica's racist white city officials and other citizens blocked the development from happening. After the Black Investment Group abandoned its plan, the property was purchased by white developers. The white group's beach resort plans were approved, allowing the construction of the iconic Casa del Mar Club, which is now a hotel, and another beach club, the Edgewater, which today is a hotel called Shutters on the Beach. And all of this happened before 1930. These Santa Monica Black enterprises were among a few important attempts at beach area business development that were sabotaged by white supremacist actions, overlapping the rise of Black beach culture and residency to support a deepened community life and African American made place in Southern California beach city environs in the first half of the 20th century. While racial discrimination, in particular racist restrictive covenants, inhibited African Americans from buying property throughout the urban region, and their beach service businesses were sabotaged by white supremacist actions into even the 1950s, their community's presence and agency sustained their public space usage at the oceanfront near the Crescent Bay Park around Bay Street in Santa Monica. This and other Southern California leisure spaces marked an African American identity on the regional landscape and social space as they confronted the emergent power politics of leisure space and set the stage for these sites as places for remembrance and invention, of invention and public contest. The City of Santa Monica's 2005 local landmark designation of Phillips Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church set the stage in 2008 for the official recognition with a cultural monument of the historical African American beach gathering place at Bay Street and Oceanfront Walk. Also recognized was Nick Gabaldon, the first documented surfer of African American and Mexican American descent in the Santa Monica Bay. Gabaldon died in a surfing accident at the Malibu Pier in 1951 at age 24. For many in contemporary times, he has become an easy figure for diverse audiences to connect with. His story links to a more complex culturally inclusive stories of our collective national and global history, beach access issues, and watershed stewardship because of surfing's romantic attention and emotional entanglement with nature, beauty, the body, a practice, and just unadulterated play. He represents African Americans of his era that challenged racial and class structures by confronting the emergent politics of leisure and recreation access when they sought self-fulfillment, surfed, and hung out at the oceanfront, a public space that was a centerpiece of California's 20th century identity. The stories of African Americans' actions to use this and other beaches embody the local stories that contribute to the national narrative of mass movement to open leisure spaces to all, demonstrating how the struggle for leisure and public space, along with political and economic issues, reshaped the long freedom rights struggle. In June 2019, this same beach was honored with a listing as the Bay Street Beach Historic District on the National Register of Historic Places for its significance in the African American experience in U.S. history for pleasure and contestation. This is the first historic district in Santa Monica to receive this national honor, and one of the few in California associated with people of color. As a public historian, I led coordination I led coordination to facilitate remembrance of African Americans. I've led coordination of to facilitate remembrance of African American voices at Santa Monica's historic sites through the development of innovative public programming partnerships between the Santa Monica Conservancy, Heal the Bay, the Black Surfers Collective, the Surf Bus Organization, and other public officials. The benefits of ongoing investment in pluralistic heritage and nature education through these partnerships is important to continue building future pathways to new, wider, and younger audiences, as well as established audiences in support of heritage and nature conservation ideals. And I would have a slide up showing young people on the beach learning about history and having a surfing lesson, and also learning some things about shoreline wildlife. This programming that I'm talking about has been manifested in things like Nick Gabaldon Day, International Coastal Cleanup Day, field trips for youngsters from inland areas, and Belmar History Plus Art, which I'm going to give a little more information about soon. These programs actively connect diverse publics to more complex, culturally inclusive stories of our collective national history, heritage conservation issues, beach wildlife appreciation, and watershed stewardship, as well as aspirations to environmental justice policies involving beach access issues and social action intersecting with beach recreation. As part of the California Coastal Commission's policy mandate and my advocacy, Santa Monica officials were required to develop an education program to teach the public about the erased history of the early African American visitors, residents, and business people who contributed to making Santa Monica a vibrant and unique place from the 1900s to 1960 in beach neighborhoods south of the 10 freeway around the Civic Center campus as a construction permit condition for what is the new historic Belmar Park at 4th and Pico. The commissioners saw my proposal as an action to set in motion their new, wider environmental justice policy strategies and implementation of their new authority to help ensure equitable coastal access for marginalized communities. Santa Monica officials found funding to develop this new initiative attached to the park's construction and invited me to participate in its development. This programming became Belmar History Plus Art, a multifaceted education, inspirational, remembrance, and commemorative justice initiative that includes a context essay, a permanent outdoor exhibition, installation of interpretive text panels, which I produced, and a large sculpture by artist April Banks. Also, we did K-12 lesson plans that were produced in conjunction with UCLA's teacher enrichment program staff and master public school teachers. And then there's other educational programming that includes high school student artwork, and all of this will continue to bring this area's history to life for present and future generations. As the nation and the world have been grappling simultaneously with a pandemic and a reinvigorated longing for racial equity and Black dignity, along with the efforts to strengthen our democratic norms and values after the domestic terrorism at our nation's capital in 2021, the Belmar History Plus Art project is timely as a contribution, as it helps open and inform contemporary life for understanding of those who came before us in Santa Monica's historical African American community life. It helps build a broader, richer, and more accurate understanding of our shared history and identity in our global, national, regional, and local citizenship. At the same time, this project is a reminder of the African American community's loss, and that there is still so much which is not understood about the history and places of Santa Monica, California, and the United States, which need to be documented and made known to people. In the last few years, celebration and symbolism of the change and solidarity of the changes, and in the last few years, celebration and symbolism of the changes and solidarity with the renewed racial justice movement around the world have been articulated in the dismantling, defacing, and scheduling of removal of monuments which symbolize iconography of a racist past, and that are a reminder of how systems have failed us. A wide range of structures are described as monuments, commemorative and storytelling spaces that exist at the intersection of public space, political power, public memory, and the enthusiasm of the groups which install them. Removal of public space symbols to a racist past are a significant step to a more just future and are important to overdue structural reforms. Symbolism does matter. Recognition of more diverse narratives, sites, and creation of new knowledge and public displays that recognize the underrepresented and challenge hegemonic and white supremacist narratives will help connect to a more representative history and identity. These new initiatives can be a vehicle for healing and education, as well as sites that offer opportunities for cultural tourism in communities. These highlighted old, new, and needed future public actions that I've talked about are reminders there are still changes that must occur to dismantle white supremacy, police brutality, and anti-black racism for a better society. Simultaneously to, and I would have shown you one of those Confederate monuments that had been removed, a few of them, and then I would have also shown you, in addition to looking at a few things of the Belmar History plus Art components, I would have shown you some other examples of new monuments around the nation, one of which would be here in Ventura at Tortilla Flats. Simultaneously to needed national heritage conservation policy reforms, new forms of monuments and space rooted in the ideas of commemorative justice should be asked for by those demanding more inclusive narratives in public displays. These broader, innovative ways of sharing untold stories and places of Black life alongside designating landmarks, erecting traditional monuments and other remembrance spaces will have a more lasting societal structural effect. This is what we hope that we've done in the development of the Belmar History and Arts multifaceted education, inspirational, and remembrance programming that tells a more complex American story that will enliven the past in resonating ways for my more diverse constituents. The reconstruction of public meaning of Santa Monica's urban landscape and heritage conservation amplifies a broader societal understanding of Black life as part of our collective and diverse California cultural heritage to provide, hopefully, broader coastal zone accessibility for present and future generations. On this note, the Belmar History and Art initiative has also inspired Santa Monica public officials to begin more efforts to address the legacy of racism and marginalization of people of color. And among these things, the officials have announced a new program of under market rate housing for rent, where people that have been displaced due to freeway incursion into the area and in the Belmar area will get, so this is 50 years ago, will have an opportunity to apply for this housing, and they're descendants. So there's 100 spaces. Myself, I think they should just be giving people the money and letting them, decide what they want to do with it versus, giving apartments. But I mean, they're not giving; you have to apply. But anyway, so that's one program that's been inspired by our project, and then also another program which I was mentioning to Professor Jose here earlier, and one of his other colleagues, is that the city has started this new program called Acknowledgement and Reframe, and it is focused on centering the voices and experience of communities of color who have been historically excluded from discourse about representation in civic spaces and memory. And when they announced this program, they said that our project, Belmar History and Art, was identified as a demonstration project to inspire this new initiative. And so with this project, the city is embarking on a public engagement process to reconsider the Work Progress Administration era murals by Stanford McDonald Wright that were done in the 1930s in the City Hall lobby with a goal of commissioning new artworks, and hopefully they're going to do some lesson plans too, but I don't have anything to do with that. That will convey this new interpretation will convey more of the region's history in a better, as they put it, a better expression of today's community values. They also just instituted city holidays for Cesar Chavez's birthday and for Juneteenth. And all of these, they've said publicly, were inspired by our Belmar History Plus Art Project and the racial reckoning. They didn't say the racial reckoning, but we know that that had something to do with it. Our project started before the racial reckoning of 2020, but we contributed to that narrative, certainly. So the Santa Monica public space projects that I discussed today are showing value on multiple fronts as commemorative justice initiatives that are important symbolic actions of equity and inclusion for social, environmental, and commemorative justice that recognize African Americans and other marginalized communities have contributed to making the colorful history of Santa Monica. That we have a right to historical and cultural sites, a place in the American identity, and the joys of cultural expression and self-fulfillment, along with clean air, clean water, and enjoyment of all America's natural and socioeconomic resources. Like many white Americans, Black Americans were lured to California for its opportunities and the good life imagery produced by writers, painters, photographers, and movie makers, which were used by various boosters promoting migration to the state. The stories and imagery of African Americans who participated in various phases of the Western migration and settlement continue to remain largely absent from the dominant mythologies and history surrounding the Western migration, notwithstanding investigations of the Black West published during the last 50 years. So today I've briefly highlighted little-known stories about African American agency and socioeconomic investment in the California dream lifestyle at what have been called frontier of leisure destinations in Southern California. The intersections of the stories in my book and the public process activities I have discussed for education, remembrance of our collective history, cultural identity, and stewardship action offer new ways to connect people with natural, cultural, and historical heritage and encourage visitation to these locations and others around the nation. I, as a historian, will continue to firmly engage in encouraging people to use history for these broader educational programs for wider equity and access for all people's enjoyment of the California and other American cultural and natural resources now and in the future. So I hope that you will take time to learn more about these forgotten Black Western pioneers and their undertakings and their California dreams that are showcased in the projects that I talked about, particularly the Belmar History and Art project, and ponder their implications of the stories in all of this for our lives today and in your own work. And I hope that you'll take time to look at my book, Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era, and visit some of the places around your area that have that offer a broader recognition of the history of the area, and that hopefully some of your research will help to spur new local commemorations of the area's history. Thank you.